When you're in Prague in 1938 as a Jewish Czechoslovakian, a new fear arose with the advancement of the Nazi power. What those Jews did not know at the time was that in only a few short years, Terezin would be transformed into a Jewish ghetto and a Gestapo prison. In 1942, the Nazi regime took control of the small military town, turning its main focus towards separating the Czechoslovakian Jewish population from the rest of the country. Over the next 3 years, 33,000 of those Jews would come to perish within the town walls. At its peak, the holding camp held 58,487 people at once, while a total of 150,000 people passed through the camp. The camp itself was split up into two different parts, the small fortress and the large fortress. The large fortress functioned as the town itself that held the majority of the population. By mid-1942, the civilian population was forced out of their homes, leaving a ghost town behind that soon became occupied by thousands of Jews. While the vast majority of Jews held there would go on to perish in a concentration camp, many died in the waiting town of Terezin from malnutrition or bad conditions. Within the town, people were separated into men, women, and children, with the elderly and sick separated out as well into their own barracks. While Terezin shared many of the terrible conditions that other ghettos and camps had as well, it was unique in that it was used as the staging ground for several Nazi propaganda films on the Jewish ghettos. Those being held in the camp were given the unique experience of being able to create art because of this reason. The Jews were able to paint, draw, sing, play instruments, put on plays and performances, and play games. Among the thousands that passed through Terezin, there were some of the most talented musicians, artists, actors, and scholars. One young girl in particular documented her time both in Terezin and the camps she would come to live in through her art and writing. Helga Weiss kept her art hidden from the Nazis, depicting what life was really like in the ghetto. If not for her uncle who hid much of her work, we would not have countless pieces of her art that showcase life in the ghetto. Because of these unique circumstances, Jews in Terezin were able to keep spirits alive with their art. The people living within the town walls created hundreds of pieces of art that lived on to tell the stories of their time alive in the town. Plays and performances often put on were done in rough conditions, with costumes usually made from clothes of other prisoners who had perished under the terrible conditions. Thousands of letters and poems have been saved, detailing both the day-to-day lives of those in prisons. Despite the fact that it was not allowed, children attended school in the ghetto, learning to write, read, and create art. 90% of these children went on to be murdered in death camps. The Nazi propaganda films shot within Terezin were done by Jewish filmmakers who were then killed in camps immediately afterwards. The films portrayed life in the ghetto to be much better than it was, leaving out details of living conditions, lack of food, and slave labor present. It wasn't until transfers from other camps and ghettos came to Terezin that fear set in. With the new arrivals, news of gas chambers and mass murders spread throughout the ghetto, causing a sudden sense of dread with the news of transport trains taking Jews from Terezin to new unknown destinations. Alongside this new fear, imprisonment in the small fortress increased the more time that Jews spent in the ghetto's large fortress. The small fortress was established in June of 1940 as a prison for the Nazis. This prison was used to hold people captive who spoke out against the Nazi reign and rebelled against them. 90% of these inmates were Czechs and Slovaks. For the 5-year reign, around 32,000 people were sent to this prison. Prisoners were forced into slave labor and completed tasks like maintaining the prison, building various structures, tilling fields that were located in between the walls, and working in the crematorium. The entrance of the prison contained the words Arbeit macht frei, which translated as work sets you free. This saying was significant because it was the slogan for many concentration camps, and Terezin was the only ghetto that contained this slogan. More than 250 prisoners were shot and killed in this prison. Before the crematorium was built, the dead of the ghetto were buried in individual and mass graves. The crematorium was built in the beginning of October 1942 in order to keep up with the mass amounts of deaths each day. This was supervised by German officers who forced 18 prisoners to work around the clock, completing autopsies and operating the incinerators to get all human remains out individually and place them in urns. A difficult task for these prisoners was having to pick out fragments of gold from the ashes and broken dentures and hand them to German SS officers. Cremation records were kept in daily logs that listed basic information about the deceased that were also listed on each urn. They included the name, transport number, and cremation number. All of the urns of the deceased were first kept in the funeral ceremony rooms, as the SS officers wanted to make the prisoners believe that the remains would receive proper burial after the war. Unfortunately, most of these urns were destroyed by German SS officers before the end of the war. According to records kept by the crematorium workers, approximately 30,000 victims were cremated from 1942 to 1945. Of the 150,000 Jews that passed through Terezin, a little over 17,000 survived, including those who were transferred to other death camps. Many of those survivors lived to their late years, proving that the horrors they went through did not take away from their love for life and their religion. Terezin today functions as a town of about 3,000 civilians, with the weight of its history resting on its residents. Many of those people returned to Terezin because of their family life before the town was transformed into a Jewish ghetto.